Frank Sinatra was sitting in his car outside Ava Gardner's house at 2 in the morning when he decided he was going to ask her to marry him. Not because it was a good idea, not because it made sense, but because he had been sitting there for 3 hours waiting to see if another man would leave her apartment. And somewhere around the second hour, he had realized that this was what his life had become. Waiting in the dark, watching her windows, wondering who she was with, and instead of walking away like a sane person would, he had decided to ask her to marry him. Because Frank Sinatra had never been accused of being sane when it came to Ava Gardner. It was November 1950. Frank was still married to Nancy, his wife of 12 years, the mother of his 3 children. He was still living in the house in Toluca Lake. He was still pretending, for the benefit of the newspapers and his career and his children, that his marriage was fine. But everyone knew it wasn't fine. Everyone knew that Frank Sinatra was destroying his life for a woman who treated him like an interesting toy she hadn't decided whether to keep. Frank got out of the car. He walked up the path to Ava's front door. He knocked. No answer. He knocked again, louder this time. A light came on inside. Then another. Then the door opened and Ava stood there in a silk robe, her hair messy, her face bare of makeup, looking like the most beautiful thing Frank had ever seen. "Frank, what the hell are you doing here? I need to talk to you. It's 2 in the morning. I know what time it is." Ava looked at him for a long moment. Then she stepped aside and let him in. Frank walked into her living room. It was a mess. Empty glasses on the coffee table, cigarette butts in ashtrays, a record still spinning on the turntable, the needle scratching at the end. "Were you alone?" Frank asked. Ava closed the door and turned to face him. "That's none of your business." "Yes, it is." "No, Frank, it's not. You're married, remember. You don't get to show up at my house in the middle of the night and interrogate me about who I spend my time with." Frank walked to the window and looked out at the street, at his car parked under a tree where he thought she wouldn't see it. "How long were you out there?" Ava asked. Frank turned around. "What, in your car? How long were you sitting out there watching my house?" Frank didn't answer. Ava laughed, but it wasn't a happy laugh. "Jesus Christ, Frank, this is insane. You know that, right? This whole thing, it's insane." "I'm leaving Nancy," Frank said. Ava's expression didn't change. "You've said that before. This time I mean it. You said you meant it last time too, and the time before that, and the time before that." Frank took a step toward her. "Ava, I'm serious. I'm going to leave her. I'm going to get a divorce. And then I'm going to marry you." Ava stared at him. "You're out of your mind." "Probably, but I don't care. I can't do this anymore. I can't be married to Nancy and in love with you. It's killing me." Ava sat down on the couch. She picked up a pack of cigarettes from the table and lit one. She didn't offer one to Frank. She just smoked and looked at him like she was trying to figure out whether he was serious or whether this was just another one of his dramatic declarations that would be forgotten by morning. "Your career is already a disaster, Frank. If you leave Nancy, it's going to get worse. The studios won't touch you. The radio stations won't play your records. You'll be finished. I don't care. You will when you're broke and nobody wants to hire you." Frank sat down next to her, close enough that their legs were almost touching. "I'd rather be broke and with you than successful and without you." Ava took a drag of her cigarette. "That's the dumbest thing you've ever said. And you've said a lot of dumb things." "I mean it, Ava." She looked at him, really looked at him, at the dark circles under his eyes, at the way he was sitting on the edge of the couch like he was ready to spring up at any moment, at the desperation radiating off him like heat. "Frank, what do you want from me?" "I want you to say yes. I want you to say that when I get divorced, you'll marry me." Ava laughed again. "You want me to wait around while you figure out how to leave your wife? While you deal with lawyers and the press and everyone in America calling you a bastard for abandoning your family? And then, after all that, you want me to marry you and what? Play house? Settle down? Have kids? Yes, that's never going to happen. Why not? Because I'm not Nancy, Frank. I'm not going to sit at home waiting for you to come back from recording sessions. I'm not going to smile for photographers and pretend everything is perfect. I'm not going to be the good wife." Frank grabbed her hand. "I don't want you to be Nancy. I want you to be you. That's the whole point." Ava pulled her hand away. "You say that now, but you don't know what you're asking for. You think you want me, but what you really want is some fantasy version of me. The version that exists when we're drunk at 3 in the morning and everything seems possible. But the real me is difficult and selfish, and I get bored easily. The real me will make your life hell." "I don't care," Frank said again. "You should." They sat in silence for a while. Ava finished her cigarette and immediately lit another one. Frank watched her. Watched the way the smoke curled up toward the ceiling. Watched the way her hands moved. He had memorized every detail of her. The way she laughed, the way she walked, the way she looked at him sometimes like she couldn't decide whether she loved him or hated him. "I was with someone tonight," Ava said quietly. Frank felt something cold slide through his chest. "Who does it matter?" "Yes." Ava looked at him. "It was nobody, just some actor MGM set me up with for publicity. We had dinner. He drove me home. He tried to come in, and I told him no. That's it. That's the whole story." "Did you want him to come in?" "No. Why not?" Ava stubbed out her cigarette violently. Because I kept thinking about you, Frank, because I sat across from this perfectly nice man, and all I could think about was whether you were sitting outside my house in your car like some insane person, which you were. Frank smiled. So you do love me. I didn't say that. You didn't have to. Ava stood up and walked to the bar. She poured herself a scotch. She didn't ask Frank if he wanted one. Love isn't enough, Frank. You think it is, but it's not. We're going to destroy each other. You know that, right? If you leave Nancy and marry me, we're going to destroy each other. Frank stood up and walked over to her. He took the glass out of her hand and set it on the bar. Then he put his hands on either side of her face and made her look at him. Then let's destroy each other. I'd rather have 5 years with you and burn out completely than have 50 years with someone else. And wonder what would have happened if I'd been brave enough to choose you. Ava's eyes filled with tears. She never cried. Frank had seen her angry, happy, cruel, kind, but he had almost never seen her cry. You're going to regret this, she whispered. Maybe, but I'm going to do it anyway. Ava kissed him. It was a desperate kiss. The kind of kiss that happens when two people know they're making a terrible decision and decide to make it anyway. Frank left Nancy 3 weeks later. He moved out of the house in Toluca Lake and into a small apartment in West Hollywood. The press had a field day. Frank Sinatra, the family man, the crooner who sang about love and devotion, had abandoned his wife and children for Ava Gardner, the sultry movie star with a reputation. The Catholic Church condemned him. Radio stations stopped playing his records. His agent called to tell him that the studios were reluctant to cast him. Frank's career, which had already been struggling, went into freefall. But Frank didn't care. He was with Ava. They spent their days in bed and their nights in clubs. They drank too much. They fought constantly. They broke up and got back together a dozen times. Once, during a particularly bad fight, Ava threw a bottle at Frank's head. It missed and shattered against the wall. Frank threw one back. It didn't miss. Ava ended up with a cut on her forehead that required 3 stitches. They made love in the emergency room bathroom while waiting for the doctor. The divorce from Nancy took 2 years to finalize. 2 years of lawyers and arguments about money and custody. 2 years of Frank's children refusing to speak to him. 2 years of Nancy playing the martyred wife in the newspapers while Frank played the villain. When it was finally over, when the papers were signed and Frank was free, he married Ava on November 7, 1951. The wedding was small. Just a few friends. Dean Martin was there. Sammy Davis Jr. Nobody from Frank's family attended. His children didn't come. His mother called him the night before and told him he was making the biggest mistake of his life. The marriage lasted less than 6 years. 6 years of passion and violence and love and hate. They fought in hotels and on movie sets and in restaurants where other diners would stop eating to watch them scream at each other. Ava would disappear for days without telling Frank where she was going. Frank would show up at her film shoots and make scenes. Once, he got so jealous watching her do a love scene that he punched the actor. MGM threatened to sue him, but there were good times too. Times when they would lie in bed for hours just talking. Times when Frank would sing to Ava while she fell asleep. Times when they would drive up the coast and find some small motel and pretend they were normal people with normal problems. Times when Frank would look at Ava and think that maybe, just maybe, they could make it work. They couldn't. The problems were too big. Ava wanted children, but kept getting pregnant and not wanting to be pregnant. She had at least 2 abortions during their marriage, maybe more. Frank wanted her to stay home and stop making movies. Ava refused. She was a star. She wasn't going to give that up for anyone. Frank's career was in the toilet, and he resented that Ava was successful while he was struggling. Ava resented Frank's jealousy and possessiveness. They were destroying each other. Exactly like Ava had predicted they would. The end came in 1957. They had been separated for months, but neither of them had filed for divorce. They were in Mexico. Frank was there trying to convince Ava to give it another try. Ava was there because she didn't know how to say no to Frank, even when saying no was the right thing to do. They were sitting in a hotel bar. It was late. They had been drinking for hours. I can't do this anymore, Ava said suddenly. Frank looked at her. Can't do what? This, us, any of it. It's killing me, Frank. Loving you is killing me. Frank didn't say anything. What could he say? She was right. They were killing each other. Slowly but surely, they were destroying everything good that had ever existed between them. So that's it, Frank said, finally. We just give up. It's not giving up. It's survival. Ava finished her drink and stood up. I'm going to file for divorce. And this time, I'm not going to change my mind. This time, it's really over. Frank watched her walk out of the bar. He didn't follow her. He just sat there, staring at his empty glass, thinking about how he had destroyed his first marriage for this woman, how he had lost his children's respect for this woman, how he had sacrificed everything for this woman, and now she was walking away and there was nothing he could do to stop her. The divorce was finalized. On July 5, 1957, Frank signed the papers without reading them. He didn't care about the details. He just wanted it to be over. After the divorce, Frank tried to move on. He dated other women. He eventually married twice more, but he never stopped loving Ava Gardner. even when she was married to other men, even when years had passed and they barely spoke, even when he was old and she was sick and they were both just shadows of who they had been. In 1990, Ava Gardner died of pneumonia in London. She was 67 years old. When Frank got the news, he was at home in Los Angeles. He was 74, frail, his memory starting to go. His housekeeper heard him crying in his bedroom. She had worked for Frank for 20 years and had never heard him cry before. She knocked on the door. "Mr. Sinatra, are you all right?" There was no answer. She opened the door. Frank was sitting on the edge of his bed, holding a photograph. It was from 1951. Frank and Ava, on their wedding day. They looked young and happy, and completely unaware of what was coming. "She's gone," Frank said. His voice was barely above a whisper. The housekeeper didn't know what to say, so she just stood there while Frank Sinatra, the chairman of the board, the man who had never let anyone see him weak, cried for a woman he had married 40 years ago and never stopped loving. 3 days later, Frank had a massive stroke. He survived, but he was never quite the same afterward. The doctors said it was just age catching up with him, but the people who knew Frank understood the truth. Part of him had died with Ava, the part that still believed in passionate, all-consuming, destructive love, the part that had been willing to risk everything for a woman who had told him, on that night in 1950, that they would destroy each other. She had been right. They had destroyed each other, but Frank didn't regret it. Not for a second, because for 6 years, he had been alive in a way that most people never experience. He had loved and been loved by Ava Gardner, and even though it had cost him almost everything, even though it had left scars that never fully healed, it had been worth it. Every fight, every tear, every moment of jealousy and anger and desperate, clawing need. It had all been worth it. Frank Sinatra died on May 14, 1998. He was 82 years old. At his funeral, his daughter Tina found something in his pocket. It was a poem Ava had written him in 1952, during one of their brief periods of happiness. The paper was yellowed and creased from being folded and unfolded thousands of times. Frank had carried it with him for 46 years. The poem said, "Francis, you are impossible and infuriating, and you drive me crazy. But you're also the only man who's ever made me feel truly alive. I don't know if that's love or if it's something else. But whatever it is, I'm stuck with it. And I'm stuck with you. For better or worse. Mostly worse." That was their relationship. Impossible, infuriating, crazy, mostly worse. But also, for a brief, shining moment, the most real thing either of them ever experienced.